Welcome back, everyone, to this new episode of the Venture Podcast. James and I are so excited to be joined by Matt Puchalski. He's the founder, or co-founder rather, of Bucket Robotics. Matt and I first met, I think it was 2 years ago at a Columbia Business School event. We're very happy he decided not to do an MBA and decided to go into the startup world because he's had a lot of success in it so far. He was in the Y Combinator batch this summer, and he did very well in the batch as well. He started a month ago as a partner at PioneerFund, and we're just super excited to talk to him. So, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much, Bryce. It's incredibly exciting to be on the pod. And just like you said, it's been so long. It's crazy to think what's happened in 2 years. So it's really fun to see, to see you guys and talk about this.
For sure, for sure. And Matt, off the camera, we were talking a bit about your story, and you have an amazing, just crazy story. So I think we want to throw it to you for that as our first question today.
For sure, yeah. A little bit about me. My name is Matt Puchalski. I grew up in the middle of New Jersey. So I went to grade school and high school in the middle of New Jersey. I was a giant dork in high school and really was super excited about engineering and Latin. Actually, I applied to electrical engineering programs and Latin programs. But I visited Atlanta, Georgia with my family when I was a junior in high school, and I fell in love with Georgia Tech. It was my number one school, and when I got in, I knew that I was going. And so at Tech, I studied electrical engineering and kept a little Latin flair. Have a minor in, I think it's law, technology, and policy. And Georgia Tech was one of the two biggest, most exciting things that have happened to me in my entire life. The second being getting into Y Combinator. When I was at Tech, I was able to live abroad in Metz, France.
Wow.
I co-opted at Michelin at the Research Center in Greenville, South Carolina. And through that experience, I got an internship at Uber ATG in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was my final experience in college before I transitioned full-time to be a self-driving car engineer at Argo AI. That was the very start of my career. And then from there, worked on robot cars at Argo, Latitude, and Stack AV. And then after that, I started Bucket Robotics. And so I met you, Bryce, right in the middle of that story after Argo ended, and I was just starting work at Latitude, which is Ford's Level 3 autonomy company.
That's awesome, and it's an awesome story. And I know something else, another part of that story that we've talked about as well is your passion for gardening. Is that something that you just picked up in the pandemic? I know the Pandemic Gardener's Journal. Can you talk to us a bit about that as well? Because I think that's super unique.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So like I said, when I grew up in New Jersey, I spent some time cutting the lawn every Sunday, but never really was into gardening. But during the pandemic, when we were in lockdown, I was living with my brother in my slightly haunted house in Pittsburgh.
And why is it slightly haunted?
It's over 100 years old, and there were two of us living there, and we would hear footsteps, so something spooky was going on. But it was really during the pandemic that I was staring out my back window every day, looking at that little pile of dirt and concrete that I called my backyard, and I said, I want to do something about that. And so I dove right into gardening, and that year of 2020 it turns out that I really love gardening. It's planning, it's optimization, it's math, it's art. So I've grown corn, pumpkins, cucumber, everything to make kimchi. Then I made kimchi. Got roses back there. Yeah, all kinds of crazy stuff. I could send you pictures if you'd like. I mean, I've definitely sent you pictures before.
Matt, when did you sort of realize that you loved building things or that you were entrepreneurial? Was this like your first go? Was gardening your first kind of dive into building something? Or did you have other sort of projects that sparked an interest like that?
Yeah, when I was in college, I was studying electrical engineering, which could mean a lot of different things in a lot of different directions. It's a very, very broad field. And I was taking some very theoretical electives about signal processing and very math oriented. But really, the start was my first summer at Michelin's test track in
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence County, South Carolina. Um, I was 19 years old, and that was the first time I was an engineering co op responsible for, hey, Michelin has a partnership with name OEM. We've got this vehicle, an actual car manufacturer. The car is going to be here for 3 days. We need to complete this test. Co-op, go figure out how to add a bunch of instrumentation and don't destroy the experimental car. They own it, we don't. So that sort of sparked the hunger, and then that was I knew that I wanted to build. And so when I was lucky enough to get the job offer at Argo I started as the reliability engineer, and that really kept it going. So I went from working at a large organization to working at a startup to now I have started my own startup.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love to dive a bit more deeper into Argo AI. Can you talk to us a bit about your time there and some key lessons and things that you really took away from that experience that made you think, hey, um, this is how I want to approach it when I make my own company when you made Bucket Robotics.
Yeah, so Argo AI was a level 4 autonomous vehicle company. So we built fully autonomous vehicles that would be able to take people from point A to point B. So you think of about the Waymos that are riding around in Arizona or San Francisco. Argo built autonomous vehicles for Ford and Volkswagen. And I was so lucky. I think I was the youngest engineer when I started, and we only had 5 cars, and it was the middle of winter. And I was responsible for just make the cars work and then write down how they broke so the actual adults in the room with like their PhDs and their own Wikipedia pages could figure it out. And so that gave me a deep appreciation for just how weird and wacky robots are, and how no matter how good your team is, no matter how observant you are, working in continuous time systems, working in the real world is crazy bananas. And so you need to be able to deal with that, and you need to be able to have a good team around you who are able to adapt and adapt safely without cutting corners. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Bryce, did I ever tell you about the story of the iguanas in Miami?
Not of the iguanas in Miami, but it sounds really interesting. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So at Argo, we had vehicles that operated in Miami and in South Beach. And the whole point of building a self driving car is that you need to make it work all of the time, right? And so we would send the cars out, including in winter. And in Florida, there are massive iguanas. I had never seen these in my life in living in New Jersey, but these things are so big, they're like house cats. And they climb up trees, and because they're cold blooded, when it gets too cold, sometimes the iguanas just let go of the tree and they fall. Yes, yeah. And so this was a scenario we had to account for these fully autonomous vehicles. We still park them overnight, and we parked some outside. So what do you do if an iguana crawls up a tree and then freezes and then drops onto your insanely expensive sensors that are on the outside of your vehicle? How do you handle that situation? How do you even know? This felt like a theoretical until one day we went back and there was an actual iguana that actually fell on one of the cars, and it messed with the calibration to the point that we had to do something about it. In a billion years, I wouldn't have come up with that, but that's just you could think, okay, cool, thermodynamics exists, right? People get impatient in different driving scenarios, but iguanas falling out of trees? No. And that was just one of the like thousands of scenarios that that was just like a Tuesday at the time. But I look back and it's like, oh, wow, I'm really glad that we had a system in place. We had the talent in place, and we had the patience in place that when that Slack message came across and said, I think a frozen iguana broke one of our robots, everybody didn't just laugh at it. They said, okay, cool. Let's pull that robot away. Let's get to work, right? Let's figure it out. And then, yeah, we could have a laugh about it later.
That's awesome. That's so funny. Could you tell us a bit about like how you solved that problem? Was that more of a software issue? Did it end up being more so hardware? How did you approach like problem solving? Maybe that can, help people think about how to solve problems that are just they don't know why they happen or they seem very random.
Yeah, so this is something that I love thinking about. And this is something that I talk to a lot of my friends who are still in self driving. When you speak to somebody who is on the operations team, as you get closer and closer to the actual robots, people have a better understanding of the system, but a much more limited vocabulary. So if you ask a random operator of like a really complex robot what the biggest problem they experience is, they're always going to say the internet doesn't work. And so you have to disentangle what does that actually mean? Is that my laptop is unplugged from my robot? Is that the internet actually doesn't work? I'm in some cage. And so for the iguana problem, the symptom that was exhibited is, hey, this vehicle is not riding perfectly straight. These are robots, they all act the same. This one, I'm in a line of traffic and this guy is askew. Something is off. So, okay, cool. I have a vehicle actual motion control issue. Is that the vehicle itself? No, the car's not throwing any code, so maybe it's the sensor. How do sensors break? Just sort of triage through of, is this a different operator? Is this, what is changed? And then you start to run experiments very quickly and rely on your corpus of data, your past experience and your metrics to rule out what you think it can't be. You pretend to be Sherlock Holmes. The best engineers I know are people who love mystery stories.
For sure.
And so if you just treat it like a big mystery, yeah.
Very cool. James?
Yeah, Matt, I'm curious. So you've worked for both big companies and then as well as startups. What have you noticed being key differences to the two? And what did you enjoy more? And two, what were the different learnings you had from both experiences?
Yeah, so you're right. I've worked at, Michelin, Uber, those were large companies. Worked at a growing startup at Argo, and then I was an early employee at Stack AV, and then finally I've started a company. Right now we only have two people. And so what is different about those experiences is the types of problems you encounter. When I was working at larger companies, it's so fun to see established process and really start to understand, wait, why do we do things this way? And sometimes the answer is, well, 100 years ago. And then you sit there and you think, oh, okay, that is a really cool reason. Thank you, I've learned something. But then when you have those head scratchers of, wait a second, you're describing a technology that doesn't exist anymore, and we're describing machines that we don't even use anymore. Why are we doing this? At some organizations, you are given the freedom to say, hey, let's go. And at others, it's, oh, we have a different process to handle that. And so it's very good. It was a great experience to be young and to work at a research center for a large company because I got to see a little bit of both. And then working at a startup just out of college and saying, hey, congratulations, you found the problem, you fixed the problem, is very much so the attitude. And so where I'm deeply grateful to my time in the self-driving industry is you find the problem, you fix the problem. If you're working at a startup or some online commerce, there are scales, you don't want to frustrate people, but working with robots that are on the public road, you can't just give a crappy, okay, this is probably going to work, we'll use duct tape. No, these are robots that are operating on the road with other people. You treat it seriously, you understand the problem, and by doing so you build a really robust product. You also learn the system in a way that would have taken me like a whole PhD. I got the on-the-job training in a few months. And yeah, it might lead to your early balding. I had hair when I started, but that might be genetics. I don't know.
It sounds like that startup experience really prepares you and equips you with the skills to build your own business, which you're doing now. And so I'm curious, what gave you the conviction to send that application into Y Combinator, and how did that application process kind of go?
So my co-founder is an absolutely brilliant engineer by the name of Steph Walski. Steph is a guy who started at Argo a few months after I did. Steph is brilliant, and he was also in Pittsburgh. And so in during the pandemic is when we really became friends. We were in a D&D, Dungeons and Dragons group together, and we went to the same rock climbing gym. Um, Living in Pittsburgh, there aren't that many like rock climbing gyms, so you get to know people who are into the similar hobbies. But Steph and I always knew that we really enjoyed working together. We really love complex problems. We really, really love robots. And we both agreed that we know literally nothing about how to build a scalable business. We knew how to work at a business, but we didn't know how to build one. And so we had both quit our jobs, and then we applied to Y Combinator after the deadline. We said, what is the perfect place to take people who like working together, people who have cool ideas, and go and learn from the absolute best. And so we were at the gym. It was bench day, and we were on Hacker News, and we saw that they had extended the deadline. And I said, Steph, you and I don't have that great ideas, but let's apply to Y Combinator, and when they reject us because it's after the deadline, at least we'll know what direction what book should we read, what should we work on. And Steph is benching, and he said, okay, I believe that. What's our idea that we're applying with, and what are we going to call ourselves? And I said, Steph, I love gardening. I would love to have a bucket that follows you around in your garden. And Steph was benching again. He's like, well, I don't think that's an actually good product. What's the name? I'm like, well, Steph, I have mattsgardenjournal.com and bucket.bot registered as domain. So I guess we could be Bucket Robotics. What do you think? He's like, all right, that's a good enough name to get started. We'll definitely change it later. Because we're not going to get in. Who gets in after the deadline? Who gets in with a robotics startup? And then 2 days later, we received two sentences. Cool. Can you show us a demo? Like, oh my gosh, they read our application. Y Combinator reads every application. And so we hacked together a demo, and we turned the demo video around. And then a few hours later, we got an email saying, hey, congratulations, you're scheduled for a final round interview with Y Combinator.
Wow.
It felt like 1,000 years, but looking back, I think that was like a 5-day period from just benching and saying, hey, let's apply to Y Combinator with the idea of we like working together, we love robots, and we want to build a startup, to hacking together a demo. In between applying, we hit upon this idea of building perception systems, building cameras, building vision systems for manufacturing. And ever since then, we haven't looked back. That's what Bucket Robotics does now.
That's incredible. That's incredible. In between, and I have a question. So it was bench day before the application, and then you applied, you had the interview, you got in. So that first bench day now after, did you both PR?
Oh my gosh. Steph is much better at bench press than I am. I don't think I've ever. Yeah, I know that Steph has PR'd since in the bench.
Mm-hmm.
I was deadlifting today. I hit 315 in the deadlift today.
Wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. Thank you.
Congrats.
At the rock climbing gym down the street. Yeah. But yeah, no, it has been actually that's a fun fact. Since we've gotten into Y Combinator, and as we spend more time in San Francisco, there's a great community of people who are really into deadlifting and pull-ups. It's a great way to clear your mind. Exercise is a truly phenomenal way to clear your mind. And the startup nerds that we've met through Y Combinator have just been some of our best friends since. I couldn't have done it. We wouldn't have made this much progress without the community that we met through YC. So I'm eternally grateful for them.
No, for sure, and it's easy to support someone who is very genuine, like yourself, who is like just a charismatic, fun person, and who has a good story. So I think there's definitely some credit to give to yourself and your team for that as well. In one of our former interviews with Akshay Chalana, he really spoke about um, Akshay Chalana is a co-founder of Saphir AI. For those who haven't watched that episode, you should go watch that episode. But basically, he basically said about the launch YC post and a lot of the early traction you guys were getting. He pretty much said that you guys were like one of the top companies in that cohort. You got into YC, you went down from Pittsburgh to SF, and you just said, okay, we're gonna lock in. What did that look like? What did the growth look like at the time?
Yeah. Well, first off, I can't. You've really teed me up. Akshay and his co-founder Oscar are absolutely incredible. Saphira AI, they're doing such cool things. I wish I had them when I was building self-driving cars. So they're lovely, and they become some of our best friends in the batch. But to your question, yeah. So we applied to Y Combinator, then we got into Y Combinator, then we had to incorporate the company and find an apartment and move to San Francisco with, I think, 10 days notice. We basically booked a one-way flight with our suitcases and landed, and yeah, it was crazy. And so yeah, the whole time we were building a prototype hardware system, and we were talking to customers. So our early days, again, this feels like it was 1,000 years ago, but this was weeks ago. We had literally nothing, right? We had to initialize a Git repository, and we had a Google workspace, and we had the domain bucket.bot, and we had emails. But how do you set up all that infrastructure? So it was a lot of late nights building, and our first product that we hacked together was a magic camera box. Was how we started to sell to customers. Um, Cameras and vision systems and making robots see is a very hard problem. And it is something that is made more difficult because computer vision is very research focused. It's hard to find good computer vision people who want to get dirty in manufacturing.
Yeah.
And so our original premise was, hey, here is a computer vision engineer in a box. This is the computer. This is a clean API. This is a great camera. Here you go. Various manufacturing applications. You figure out what you want to do with it. And that lasted for like 4 days before customers started coming back with, well, I don't want a box that can do everything. I just want a solution to defect detection. Um, and so after like the fourth person who said that, I spoke to Steph and said, Steph, do you know what defect detection means? He said, no, not really. Let's Google it and let's start asking people what do they mean by defect detection. And so what we've sort of hit upon is software, and really it's a solution. It's a robotic solution to um, use a camera to look at complex 3D shapes, things that are high volume manufactured, like injection molded parts, like the insides of cars, or all kinds of medical devices, or color cosmetics like lipsticks and blemishes or creams, all different types of things. Um,
Mm.
at a very high level, these don't seem very similar, but what it boils down to is I am manufacturing something that isn't just a rectangle, something that isn't a printed circuit board. And so, because a 3D shape has lots of nooks and crannies and different ways. And so, for the people who are listening, I'm holding up a mug. So, if you imagine all of the different ways that a mug can hide different surface level cracks, and if it's painted, there are different ways that you can have defects. So, my Bucket Robotics mug, maybe the paint for the bee is slightly off or it's miscolored. That's a very difficult problem for traditional computer vision systems. And so a lot of manufacturers either just entirely have manual visual inspection, where people are paid to stare at every single mug that's manufactured, or they are paid to um, QA. They do quality assurance. And so what you do is you have a camera that's taking pictures of mugs And then when a person is staring at a screen, they see a problem, they draw a bounding box, and that is used to train a computer vision model. And at Bucket Robotics, we think that that is way too slow and deeply inefficient. And so we are using, and this was something that happened a lot in the early days of self-driving cars. And so for self-driving cars, you use synthetic data. You build a simulation and you use lots of math and the cloud to simulate what the car might do so you can train it to not do that. And we've applied that thinking to visual inspection. So we basically take a video game engine, we take in the CAD, we take in the computer drawings of our parts, and we generate thousands and tens of thousands of images of the parts. Then we generate way more of what it might look like if it's broken. So that way we can have a computer vision system that is better than a person who's actually standing there.
That sounds like
Yeah.
quite an intricate solution there, Matt. And I don't know how, like, I guess obviously when you applied to Y Combinator, you didn't know what defect detection was and you hadn't kind of paved out this solution yet. So I'm curious, what do you think made you guys, like in retrospect, what do you think made you so compelling to the partners at Y Combinator? And then once you're in the batch, like what made you guys so successful in getting to where you are today?
Yeah, so reading our initial Y Combinator application, our application was basically we're self driving car nerds and we want to take, I think almost word for word, I might have used the word nerd in the application. We're self driving car nerds. We want to take the design approach for a self driving car and apply that to manufacturing. And so that was the initial application, and the very brief window at the very start where we sort of faffed around and we were trying to find the exact what does that actually mean was a deeply anxiety ridden journey. But where we got to was actually what the application was, right? When you build a vehicle that is capable of driving itself fully on the road, you don't start with, hey, I'm going to invest a ton of money to build all of these sensors and then let it drive around passively. What you do in the year 2024 is as you are actually physically wrenching on your cars, you're building up a simulation system to train your software in a sim. And so we were doing that. We had started our simulation. Defect detection was sort of one utility out of several that we sort of presented to customers. Another thing that we thought was really cool was using our camera to make robot arms smarter. So improve the speed of robot arm motion. But it turns out that that is a very cool problem. That's a very difficult problem. There are more people who are paying people to stare at parts, and they are desperate for understanding where those parts are failing. How can I trace this more easily? How can I use this information? There are more people in that space than there are people with the time and expertise to deploy robot arms who don't know how to make cameras work with the robot arms better. So that's how we sort of hit upon this. But you're right, it is a journey, and this is something that if we weren't in Y Combinator, I wouldn't be on this podcast. I would still be in my basement in Pittsburgh hacking at a box, and this wouldn't have been possible without the partners, and this wouldn't have been possible without the community of just, again, other startup founders who, hey, Akshay, what do you think about this? Oh, geez, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's truly the magic of the program.
That's just so amazing how your life, like within a couple of months, was like completely flipped upside down. Like, I just can't, like, obviously you were working on your startup working for a startup at the time, and then all of a sudden get into Y Combinator within a couple of days, and then boom, you're in the batch and you're at the top of your batch. That's just the coolest thing in the world to me.
I don't know. It's so hard. Of top of our batch. That's other people's words. There are some companies that we're in the batch with. I am blown away. I am so thankful every single day of the companies that I still talk to people that went through the batch with us every single day. I go rock climbing with some of the people that we went through the batch with. But yeah, no, I am so incredibly grateful. And exactly to your point, in a million years, I was just a dorky kid in New Jersey. When I got into Georgia Tech, I there was exactly one other person from my high school who went to Tech, and Kayla studied aerospace engineering, and Georgia Tech is massive, so we never saw each other. So I had to make friends in Georgia, and then moving to Pittsburgh. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything about self-driving cars, and so I've been very blessed with how I've really lucked out with the communities that have been around me through my whole life. So that's something that I talk to everybody about, is really be thankful for your community and ask questions. Be kind, I guess. Maybe that's
Yeah.
you know.
And it's a super important takeaway for everyone on the podcast. Like we always talk about, ideas and the nitty gritty and the technical stuff, but like be a good person, right? Like that's the advice that I wish was probably spread more in the startup world and the corporate world in a lot of places, because it just makes everyone's lives a lot easier. And oftentimes, if you're a good person, people want to work with you, people want to talk with you, and it can make a lot of things just easier in your life as well. So I think that's great advice.
It's also hard. The other thing is kindness can be intimidating. Kindness
Yeah.
does have, a sort of anxiety around it. I'm a scary, like, bald dude. I don't go around smiling like a maniac in the middle of the night when I'm going on runs. But kindness is the entryway for being able to introspect and say, I might sound like an idiot, but I need to learn something.
Yeah.
It's kindness is just the first step of kindness and curiosity. That's the other thing that I see a lot of, very kind people who don't want to offend anyone, or
Yeah.
don't want to impose on people. And that's the second piece of advice. Like, no. People love teaching other people. You just have to ask a question. And that's important whether you're in high school or college or interviewing or applying to Y Combinator.
Exactly.
I ask questions every single day.
Exactly. I think that's awesome advice. I had a bit of a brain blank earlier on my last question, so I passed on that, but I'll ask it now. It really has to do with what we're seeing with the industrial sector in the States and manufacturing in particular. We're starting to see a huge push for incorporating AI in really as many ways as possible, and trying to bring home a lot of manufacturing back to America, a lot of the industrial sector back to America. Manufacturing detection is something that most people probably don't wake up and think of as being a huge problem. It probably is, as you've identified, and by your success so far. And my question to you is, what do you think is next? What would what other bets would you place in this space? But this seems like something that's super important. It's getting a ton of government attention from people high up at Y Combinator in the startup world. I'd love to hear your perspective on what's next for helping bring manufacturing back home.
Absolutely. There are so many different ways that we can tackle expanding the growth of manufacturing in the US and in high cost of living areas. Exactly to your point of, why I think we are seeing such reception from the market is for companies that are manufacturing inside of the US or in high cost of living areas. Manual QA, somebody who's actually paid to like stare at parts going past an assembly line, is it's a miserable job. It's hard.
Yeah.
You're standing on your feet. It's stressful. People very famously, all the way back to like World War II, have a really terrible sort of brain for identifying what is good and what is bad when you have to do that for like long periods of time. And so for companies like Bucket Robotics, where we can say, hey, you are going to get the benefit of faster detection, better traceability as to what your failures are, and your people that are on these lines are going to love you because they're not supposed to be human robots, but they're actually technicians who are empowered by data. I get really excited about the reception that we get at all levels in manufacturing. That being said, the types of manufacturing companies that we work with today are established companies. These are companies who have been manufacturing for decades and decades and have longstanding contracts. So, where I get really excited is about people who are opening up new manufacturing facilities. They are the folks who are starting out startups at New Lab in Brooklyn or in Detroit or in all corners of the world, um, who are just people who are, open up Master Car and yeah, buy a bunch of equipment and then try to figure out, okay, what am I going to be manufacturing?
Yeah.
And you're totally right. This is something that, it's not just me. It's Y Combinator. It's really a lot of people after the COVID-19 pandemic have really sort of that. I think that was the start of when the light bulb went off of, oh, wow, okay, manufacturing closer to where people are consuming things is a good idea.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Something going back a bit to your application. This will be the last question I ask about that because I want to keep asking more about Bucket Robotics. For those who don't know the Combinator application, a really famous question they always ask is, name a time when you've hacked a system to your advantage. And I'm curious, Matt, what is a time when you've hacked a system to your advantage?
Ooh, okay. I haven't thought about this since. So I remember, I will give you Steph's answer, then my answer. I believe Steph's answer was that I think he traded AMC stock, and that is what he used for his down payment for his house
Nice.
when he was like 22. Yeah.
Wow, good for him. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got a really nice house. My answer to the Y Combinator application was when I was 20. I had one more summer internship left at Georgia Tech, and there was a speaker from Uber, the ride sharing app, who came to Georgia Tech's campus. And I did all of the research I possibly could about their double secret robotics program in Pittsburgh. I sat in the front row. I answered every question that she asked to the audience, and I immediately sort of hacked the system of they didn't have interns, quote unquote, but this was somebody who was high up enough that knew there was a self-driving program, knew that they were accepting interns, and so I just hacked my way into a not publicly available internship program. I think I was the only person from my college who came up to Pittsburgh. Pretty much everybody was from Carnegie Mellon, just sort of like, I think people who walked past the Uber building and then they scooped them up with a butterfly net and then they became interns with me that summer. But, sort of hacking again, right? Of just, it was kindness and questions got me through.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
That's
that's
a
a great
really
example of
cool
that.
story.
Yeah. Sorry, James. Yeah.
Matt, I want to ask you, so you recently joined PioneerFund, which backs Y Combinator companies. And I'm curious, how did this opportunity come about, and what has the experience been like joining a VC fund, and like how have your previous experiences kind of like prepared you for this?
Yeah, so Pioneer Fund is a venture fund that, exactly as you said, Pioneer Fund is a venture fund that backs Y Combinator startups. So every batch, Pioneer Fund invests in companies that they believe in inside of Y Combinator. Bucket Robotics is backed by Pioneer Fund. So Pioneer Fund is one of our, thank you. Pioneer Fund was one of our investors in our seed stage. But that wasn't how I joined Pioneer Fund. I really loved the team that we got to meet when we were raising our seed round. And so they asked me to be a venture partner, which is a team member inside of Pioneer Fund that there's probably a more technical term for this, but essentially I am just asked to evaluate potential future investments. Be the giant curious person who is a massive robot dork. There's an onboarding questionnaire. I think I did also put down that I am an expert in gardening. So if Y
Nice.
Combinator ever backs any gardening companies, I guess I'll get to I'll hope to speak to them to invest. But yeah, I'm a part of a larger organization, a larger sort of mechanism, and so I get excited because I get to learn as I'm growing Bucket Robotics. I get to learn about building a venture scalable company inside of PioneerFund. I get to learn about what those decisions are inside of venture funds. And to PioneerFund, Y Combinator hasn't invested in that many robotics companies to date. That will definitely change in the future, but I get to bring that robotics experience to their investing toolkit. So yeah,
For sure.
it's been great.
And the point that you brought up there as well, I've definitely noticed that a couple days back they had their call to action for startups, a lot of which were more of a hardware focus, more of maybe the robotics focus as well. What's kind of cueing that shift, you think, in the Y Combinator's mind, which is kind of like a pillar in a way for the tech ecosystem, showing that, hey, maybe we need to start investing in more hardware, more robotics focus as opposed to just software. Why do you think that shift is occurring right now?
Oh gosh, that's a good question that I can't really give a good answer to.
All good. Yeah, no worries.
Honestly, that's sort of a very macroeconomic question. But what I can say, or okay, I guess, as somebody who has been in robotics for long enough at a hobbyist level and as an employee and now is building a robotics company, it has never been easier to start a robotics, to build a really compelling robotic solution to go out and sell.
Mm,
Um, Robotics and manufacturing and physical systems do take a lot longer to sell than enterprise software that you can sort of hack together. But from the advances in commoditized hardware, both sensing and computers, you look at like NVIDIA's Jetson Orin Nano is something that you can buy by the pallet on Amazon. And it's an amazingly robust and ruggedized little computer that, like, when I was 19 years old, I wish I had something like that, right?
yeah.
And so you look at that, you look at what ChatGPT is doing for dorks like me. I'm definitely a physical systems person. I'm constantly burning myself on a soldering iron. I am not great at graphic design. But through advances in LLMs, you can build a really robust, really safe robot and leverage the power of ChatGPT like in ways that you couldn't before. And so I think the barrier for entry of if you are hugely passionate about a physical system, 5 years ago, your robot probably wouldn't have gotten any funding because you had a really ugly web UI or a really crappy demo. The tools exist, and the community of people who are using the tools exists like never before. It's never been easier to ask Google or even Perplexity of how do I get a Ross bag out of my robot arm, which is super dorky, but yeah.
Very cool. Very
Very
cool.
cool, Matt. As we get to the end here, I wanted to ask you or lean on you for some advice for some of our young listeners. I mentioned we have a younger audience. What advice do you have for people who, are have hopes and dreams of building a company one day, maybe getting accepted into Y Combinator, and they're just, in school still or just entered their career and, haven't really started building yet? How can they get themselves on the right path to, you know, follow in someone like your footsteps?
Yeah, okay. Some piece of advice. One thing that I've learned from founders, not just through Y Combinator, but lots of founders, is that I have people who have founded companies are voracious readers. It's
Mm,
actually crazy to me how, again, it's people who are curious and stay curious in many different domains. So I guess to summarize that, I would encourage people to read and to learn about as many different things as possible and really try to synthesize lessons, and just you never know where your creativity is going to take, whether it's a story in a sci-fi novel or a nonfiction book. The best founders that I know are people who are constantly reading, they're constantly learning, and they're constantly reflecting on how that what they've read or what they've consumed is something that they can use to make themselves better, make their company better, make the world around them better, which I think is really cool. Another piece of advice that I would give is, again, be kind and be curious and meet as many different people as you possibly can. When I was 18 and going to college, I had never been across the Mississippi River. I had never been out of the country. I had been to Atlanta like twice before I got to Georgia Tech. And in my time in college, I was able to study abroad in France. I was a member of the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and I made friends from all over the globe that I still speak to this day. I was able to experience things that I had read about, quite frankly. And I got to live it all because I was constantly pushing myself out of my comfort zone and realizing that there is no such thing as a comfort zone. Just go out there, and people are so cool. People are great. Just talk to more people.
That's great advice. And I guess I have a question about some of the people that you've met this year as well. And it doesn't have to be limited to Y Combinator. It can be in San Francisco. But maybe what's one continual string that you found across the most interesting people you've met? I know you mentioned before a bit about reading and the importance of just being curious. But I wonder if there's anything else that is kind of a piece of continuity across these people that you've found really interesting or inspiring.
Ooh, yeah, okay. One thing that I have been absolutely it's a continuous theme inside of the group partners at Y Combinator. It's inside of some of the robotics founders that I've met as I've built Bucket Robotics. Something that keeps coming up again and again is that everybody that I really have come to admire are really fantastic listeners. They really take time to have a conversation and are people who are able to ask good questions and also truly understand the heart of what your problem is, or even what conversation you are having is. Again, shilling my friends Akshay and Oscar, they're absolutely fantastic. Just being able to talk to people who are building, whether it's the people who are like biology experts or LLM experts or just really into all kinds of really out there things. These are all people who are curious and they ask great questions, and I don't know anything about how to build a LLM app as a startup, but I know that my friends who are building those types of businesses can come to me and they can talk to me about whatever their problems are, and we could try to get to a solution together. And that's the only way that we can build is together.
Wow. I think that's an awesome place to end off on the podcast. For everyone who's listening, remember to build together. Remember to always stay kind, stay curious. Yeah, Matt, this was an awesome episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. You gave some incredible tips. I think your journey is, not to reiterate too much, but it's just really cool. It's very interesting. It's very different. I'm very happy to see an awesome robotics company in Y Combinator. As someone who has been from gardening, from Pittsburgh, from your story to Georgia Tech, I think it's just really cool. So I hope you guys have thought so as well. Everyone who's tuned into this podcast, and yeah, thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed this. Thanks, guys.